out an empty space. Long before the human race, something stirred. Vast and timeless source began, intelligence was born, and then there was the word. Powers filled the universe, matter formed and broke the curse of nothingness. Love became an age's soul, nature reached her highest goal, and breathed the breath of life. Everlasting love. Well, creatures come from out of sight, daylight came from in the night, and all was good. Life became a master plan, love produced the perfect man that's understood. Image of the Maker's word, worshipped him with all he had. But then one day, from in the depths an evil seed grew and manufactured greed that changed the way of life. Everlasting love. The loving power looked and saw inside the heart of man of law began to grow. From the fires of hell began to burn, and so he sent his chosen son to let us know. Love had surely made us all, it would surely make us fall. So from the cross, well, he showed the world that dreadful day love could be the only way. All is lost of life. Everlasting life. Love is love, and love is life.
Let us take a breath. Good morning and welcome to the worship of Emmanuel United Church of Christ. We hope that no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you find a welcome and a community here. We gather in the memory and the celebration and the honoring of our ancestors, those who have gone before, in the celebration of today, and in preparation for the future. And so we hope you find yourself in the midst of remembering and looking forward throughout this service this morning. I don't hear the car honking anymore. There was a Ford Escape beeping, but I don't hear it. So if that was your car, all right. Friends, will you stand as you are able in body or in heart for our call to worship? We gather to worship. We have come to claim our inheritance as the people of God. We gather to encounter God. We have come to experience the beautiful mix of spirit and humanity. We gather to explore faith and community. We are ready to worship in new ways. Amen. Amen. Our opening song is an oldie but a goodie, and I hope somewhere in the midst of it, you see it's kind of meant to be a little funny during our service.
This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears, of nature sings and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world, I'm resting in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, hills and the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world, the bird their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world, He shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass I hear Him pass, He speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world, oh let me never forget, that though the wrong seems of so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world, why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King, let the heavens ring, God reign, let the earth be glad.
Community, we gather. Did I turn this back on? Yes. We gather together. We come before each other in honesty and vulnerability. Will you join me in our prayer of confession? Holy God, we want to have a faith expression that reflects you and reflects our true selves. But so often we fall short. We don't speak up. We force up people into boxes, even at church. Heal us and encourage us to see others as you see us. Encourage us to see and hear your truth. Beloved community, in Christ we find true liberation, liberation for ourselves, for community, and for our world. Be assured that you are seen and you are loved. Amen. Amen. And as people reconcile to God and to one another, let us share signs of peace. And then I'll invite our kids up. Hello. How's it going? Good. Hi, Arlo. I like your shoe. Well, do you have anyone in your life that teaches you a lot? Do you have people in your life that teach you a lot about how to do something? You probably have teachers at least, right? Yeah. How about someone who teaches you how to be kind? Yeah. Maybe, what's your favorite thing you've ever learned? Do you have a favorite thing you've ever learned? How to read. That is a good one. Who taught you that? Your teacher? Not your parents over there, huh? Maybe a little bit. Mostly your teacher. What's your teacher? I don't know. We won't. It's not going out on the internet forever. I'm kidding. It's fine. You don't have to tell me. Does anyone else have a favorite thing? How to play Foursquare. That is an excellent game. How to sing and play saxophone. Who taught you that? Your mom and grandma. Excellent. Well, we're all hanging out here today. There's no Sunday school, so this is what we're doing. So you're going to hear a lot of stories. This summer, we're telling stories about people. Some of them are people in the Bible who were really interesting people. Crazy things happen in the Bible. My favorite. Never mind. We'll get to it later. It'll be another. There's a woman who, in the midst of war, the story is she got the leader of the opposing force into her tent, and when he laid down, she drove a spike through his head, and then they won. It's a wild story, guys. This stuff is wild. Anyway, lots of stories. We have a really good one today, but part of what our story is going to be about are that the people that teach us, and then they set up and they change the whole system. So I wanted to tell you about someone today. And I have a little picture. This is Rabbi Regina Jonas. And she was born she grew up in the 1920s in Germany. She was born in 1920. And she loved to study. Who loves to study? Who likes to read and learn things? You don't have to like to study. Read and learn things. She loved to read and to learn things, and she liked teaching other people, and she thought that her calling was to be a rabbi. Do you know what a rabbi is? It's like a pastor for a Jewish congregation. And so that was her calling, but at that time, women couldn't be rabbis. Does that seem fair? No. Do you think she was less qualified or capable? No, she was very smart, and she loved books, and she excelled, and she finally found someone who would ordain her. And so she wrote, and she took care of people who were sick, and she said that she believed in her belief in God's calling and her love of humans, and God planted in our hearts skills and vocation without asking about gender. Therefore, It is the duty of men and women alike to work to create according to the skills given by God. What kind of skills do you have? What are you good at? Music. Any artists in here? Yeah. Science. Reading. There it is. We'll work on that. Good at sports. Well, Rabbi Regina Jonas lived in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. Do you guys know anything about Germany in the 1930s and 40s? World War II. So there's this terrible person and a series of terrible people who ended up in power, right? It was the Nazis. And they blamed the Jewish community for everything. And at some point, they took all of Rabbi Regina's books and they burned them, the ones that she owned. And so she went and she was very worried. So she hid all of her writing and her letters and her thoughts away because she was scared something would happen. And something did happen. And in 1942, she was taken to a concentration camp. And in Czechoslovakia, and she started a synagogue there. And she taught for 2 years. And then they took her to Auschwitz. Have you heard of Auschwitz? It's a terrible place. And they killed her there. And for years and years, for 50 years, nobody saw her writings again. 50? That was a long time. Is that what it was again? That's what it says. 50 years, no one saw her writing. And she kind of was forgotten. You think that's sad, right? Yeah. And then they found them. And now they're reading them and looking at them and celebrating her all over again. And there are more women being ordained in the Jewish tradition. She set a whole precedent for people. And love people even when it was hard. We're going to tell stories all summer of people that are important to us. So I want you to think. And before you leave today, I have little notebooks that I forgot to bring in here that you can take with you and write stories. You can write your story because your story is important. And you can write the story of someone who's important to you and how they've changed your life. Yeah? We're doing a thing today. I didn't bring my... As part of today is we are celebrating those who are graduating. Do you think they have stories of people who are important in their lives? Absolutely. Do you think I asked them to share them ahead of time? Absolutely not. So I won't make you do it. That's fine. I promise. We won't put you on the spot like that. But we're going to take a minute and hear all of the things that they have planned so far, because it might change as time goes on, right? All right. Will you say a prayer with me? All right. Dear God, thank you for loving us. Thank you for putting people in our lives to teach us and show us the way. Amen. Amen. You guys may be seated. I'll invite those who are graduating to come forward. Do you have someone important in your life you want to talk about? I don't even have a mic for you. Actually, will you run and grab a mic off the top? One of the ones on the top? Yeah. Well, just to share what your plans are. All right. We have several graduates that we are celebrating in our community this morning. And so as we celebrate, as we send them off into their next adventure, will you just remind us who you are, because you're very tall and you probably weren't a while ago, where you're graduating from, and what you're going to do next. And if it's a surprise to everyone, including you, that's cool too. I'm all right with that.
Hi, my name is Egan. I'm graduating later today, actually, from University Lake School in Heartland, and I plan on attending Minnesota State University Mankato in the fall, and I plan on studying either mechanical or electrical engineering.
All right, so I'm Michael, and yesterday I graduated from Catamaran High School in Wales. Next year, I will be attending the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater to do sports marketing.
Excellent. Do you want to say something for Emma? Yeah.
So Emma couldn't be with us today because she has a gig right now at Mama D's for her flute performance. If anyone wants to stop by, she's there from 11 to 1 this afternoon. But she just graduated from the University of Whitewater, Wisconsin for music performance, and next year will be attending the University of North Carolina, Greensboro to get her master's in music performance.
Excellent. We're proud of her. And Peggy Hazelberg has graduated with a master's in nursing. It might be more specific than that. But to continue, and part of her work is supporting and educating incoming nurses, new nurses in training, which is an excellent and much needed role. So we are gathered together to celebrate the accomplishments of our graduates. Michael Phelps, Egan Stackbon, Emma Phelps, and Peggy Hazelberg. We give blessing to you for all that you have achieved and many more achievements yet to come. One part of your life's journey is complete. You will prepare to begin another phase that will take you to unimaginable places. As you prepare for your next journey, we hope that you remember the ones that you leave behind, that have loved and supported you throughout the years. We give you blessings of goodwill and love as you journey forth into the world. We thank you for the laughter and fellowship that you shared with us, and pray that as you begin your next journey, you remember times that we have shared. Use those memories as a beacon to guide you on your path. Don't look back, but continue forward while using those memories to create a new path. We pray that God will strengthen and determination to develop new relationships that will sustain. Because we are made in God's image and have been blessed with free will to make choices and decisions, we pray that God, There we go. We pray that you will make wise and rational decisions, always turning to God for help. God hears, God listens, God is with you. Do not forget that. Always keep in mind that God is not in God. Let us pray. Gracious God, surround Michael, Egan, Emma, and Peggy, and all of those graduating with your grace. Bless them with hope so that they move into the future with eager and open hearts. Help them to put the knowledge, skills, and insight gained through their education to good use for all mankind. Inspire them to believe in the goodness of life, even when faced with challenges and difficulties. As they move into this new chapter, may they grow ever more grateful, compassionate, and wise. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Congratulations. I'll give you both of them. Congratulations.
Today's reading is Numbers 27, 1 through 11. Then the daughters of Zelophehad came forward. Zelophehad was son of Zephyr, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, of the clans of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of his daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, and all the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, saying, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the congregation of those who gathered themselves together against the Lord in the congregation of Korah, but he died for his own sin, and he had no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan because he had no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brothers." Moses brought their case before the Lord. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "The daughters of Zelophehad are right in what they're saying. You shall indeed let them possess an inheritance among their father's brothers, and pass the inheritance of their father on to them. You shall also speak to the Israelites, saying, if a man dies and has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance on to his daughter. If he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to the nearest kinsman of his clan, and he shall possess it. It shall be for the Israelites a statute and an ordinance, as the Lord commanded Moses. Let us listen to the words of the Bible today.
I think that there could be a subgenre of every genre of book or movie or TV show that is sibling drama. In our books, it's the Boxcar Children. Does anybody still read the Boxcar Children? Excellent, love it. I don't think I did. But the Hardy Boys, that was a book. Back there, and of course, a time-tested and maintaining favorite of Little Women. The story of 5 sisters who navigate a world that was built for men. Was it 4 sisters? Dang it! I don't think I read it, and I haven't seen the movie. It'll look. Anyway, all right, there's 4 of them. They struggled, they strove, they grieved, they worked together, they sought their place in the world. And there are many reasons why this story has remained so important over the years that it's led to a new movie version every generation. And I think among the quality of writing and storytelling, one of the reasons is that we like stories of families and of siblings. And maybe because we can relate to them. Some people have lots of siblings and enjoy reading those stories of siblings the best they could be, of how they might relate to each other at their very best. Maybe. Our story today, the daughters of Zelophehad, is a story of sisters, of Malan, of Noah, of Hoglag. See, I have this in here 3 times, so it'll be good. Of Milcah and of Tirzah. And it's a story that most of us have never heard. And it's a story that should be in our regular Sunday school rotations. Their names should be listed among the women of faith when we think of important stories of important women. We should know their names by heart. But often the ones we know by heart are the stories of women we vilified, of Jezebel or Delilah, both of whom I'm convinced at least a little bit did the things they had to do to survive in the world around them. It's another story. But these 5 sisters are named. We'll try it again. Mala, Noah, Hoglag, Milcah, and Tirzah. They did something positive in a time of war and uncertainty and transition. The Hebrew people were standing outside of the promised land. They were figuring out how much land every tribe and every clan and every family would have. And then these 5 sisters passed into history. They had courage and strength, knowledge. They were rooted in their traditions, in their new law, so much so that they were able to challenge the leadership. They went up to Moses, and Moses took their question to God, and God declared them to be correct. These sisters stood before a congregation of leaders, all men, a crowd of thousands, and they set a precedent for the women who were to go after them. They set a precedent that the law as it was given might be good, but it wasn't going to be complete. It doesn't account for every little situation. There were going to be moments and times and situations when someone was going to need to stand up and name an injustice, whether it is built into the law or in this case, just neglected. Some people, like these sisters, were going to need to stand up and say something, to call it out and to name the injustice when they saw it. Mala, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah stood together, an intimidating situation, and they called on their tradition, and they secured their future. And they secured a place for their father's clan in the future. And so if we really look at it, it's not perfectly feminist, at least not in modern feminism. They're not going to get to keep the land in their name. It will stay in their father's name, and they will marry, and it will be still named in their father's name, and they'll pass on to sons in the future, assuming there are sons in the future. And it didn't set a precedent that daughters were going to inherit alongside their brothers in the future, at least not yet. But it was a stepping stone. It is carrying on a tradition. It is honoring the family that had brought them to this place. It is caring for their ancestors, assuring their future and their presence, and preparing for their future. When the sisters stood before the council, they honored their past and they changed the future through the law and the land. This summer, we are telling stories, and so I would like to tell a few today. On the shoulder of these sisters, these daughters, stood Antoinette Brown Blackwell. She was the first woman ordained in the United States. Yes, mostly, but definitely within the root traditions and denominations that became the United Church of Christ. She was born in 1825 and told at the age of 8 that girls could not be ministers. But she was smart and she was determined, and she finished her basic schooling. She taught and she saved money, and she enrolled in the university where she studied literature until she wore them down and they finally admitted her into the theology department. She was vocal. She was involved in justice movements and cared for the well-being of women. She wrote about her knowledge of scripture and tradition of the past, that Paul's argument about women, against women speaking in the church, was really about context and excess and not actually about leadership. In 1850, she should have graduated and been given a license to preach, but the school withheld both. She preached anyway. And in 1853, the Congregational Church relented and ordained her. In her first appointment, her first church, it wasn't perfect. And it turns out it's going to take a lot of years for some churches to believe women can be ministers. So it didn't last long, but her ministry never ended. She worked with the temperance movements. She worked in the slums and prisons of New York. She studied the association between mental illness and poverty. She wrote books, and in the decades that followed, leading to the turn of the century, most other mainline denominations ordained their first women as well. And it wasn't perfect. In a lot of cases, there was a big gap between the first person and the long line of women who would be ordained. But rooted in the past, and she's securing her present, and she set the course for the future. And so even I stand on the shoulders of Antoinette Brown Blackwell. 120 years later, William R. Johnson, Bill Johnson, became the first openly LGBT, openly gay person to be ordained in the United Church of Christ and the country. The Bay Area churches in California did not need the same convincing that the East Coast churches did 100 years earlier. But there were some churches around the country that did. Bill continued to be in ministry, supporting the ordination of LGBT people, the full inclusion in the church, and changing the whole face of religion and queerness. Standing on the shoulders of Antoinette Brown and rooted in the history and tradition, standing with his community with a vision for the future, he stood with courage in front of the church and all of the country and named that there was an injustice. And he lived with the consequences, and he lived with the struggle for the future of the church. And so I stand on the shoulders of Bill Johnson. Now, there wasn't a time in my life when I didn't know, growing up, it didn't ever occur to me that women couldn't be pastors. My church always had a woman pastor, usually the associate. So that wasn't a job that I thought was unavailable to me. It was just one I didn't want. By the time I was in high school, I thought maybe I would be interested in working with youth in the church because I had great leaders, and one of them was Ellen. Ellen didn't grow up in the church. She had some hard times in her adulthood, a difficult marriage and divorce, difficult relationships. She was a single mom of her 2 kids by the time I met her. And she was discovering her call to ministry. And it started in youth ministry. And as the call in her life grew, it changed and evolved and progressed. And she answered that call by going back to school, by going to seminary, and being a United Methodist, by going the places where they sent her, from the north woods of Rhinelander to Brown Deer. Ellen is a mystic, meaning she is led by the Spirit that breathed life into creation and moved in the upper room at Pentecost and moved through the lives of mystics before her. When I was in a tough place and needed to set a new course for my life, it happens, as happens to all of us from time to time. And Ellen invited me to join her on a retreat into the woods where she sat me down with mandalas to color. And she looked at me and said, "So now you're going to seminary?" It wasn't a question. Being a mystic doesn't always go well in the face of an institution. So her ordination process was a bit of a struggle. But Ellen was rooted in her tradition, in the history, in the stories of those who had gone before her, in her call, and she would not be deterred. She had an eye to the future, that the church that she loved would be more welcoming to all and more spirit-filled. She was ordained, and she continues to teach and serve in love and be moved in the Spirit. And I learned from her that the call in our lives will always change and grow. And I learned from her about the tenacity in the midst of struggle. And I learned from her about slowing down and listening to the Spirit, because she will not let us down. So I stand on the shoulders of Ellen. And these are stories that are meaningful to me, that have revealed the broadness that is the Church of Christ and where I might find a home in it. These are the stories of folks who have paved the way for me. And that is what we are doing this summer. That is part of who we are as a church. We study the past and we honor our ancestors. We live and thrive in the present, and we set the course for those who will follow. We are to have a vision of longevity. We are to be stewards of time, of this time, of the history, and of the future for generations from now. We are to be caretakers of all that has been and setting a course for all that might be. We stand on the shoulders of these 5 sisters, of Mala, of Noah, of Hogla, of Milcah, of Tirzah, the daughters of Zelophehad, and we honor their place in our story of faith as lives lived faithfully that set a path for future generations. And we tell the stories of those who have set us on our paths too. Amen. Friends, as we prepare our hearts for our time of communion, will you stand? Let us sing A Place at the Table.
Singing 3 verses, verses 1, verses 4, and verses 5. For everyone born, a place at the table. For everyone born, clean water and bread. A shelter, a space, a safe place for growing. For everyone born, a star overhead, and God will delight when we are creators of justice and joy, compassion and peace. Yes, God will delight when we are creators of justice, justice and joy. Verse 4. For just and unjust, a place at the table, a buster abused with meat and forgive. In anger, in good, a mindset of mercy. For just and unjust, a new way to live. And God will delight, and we are creators of justice and joy, compassion and peace. Yes, God will delight when we are creators of justice, justice and joy. Verse 5. For everyone born, a place at the table, to live without fear and simply to be, to work and look out, to witness and worship. For everyone born, a right to be free. And God will delight, and we are creators of justice and joy, compassion and peace. Yes, God will delight when we are creators of justice, justice and joy.
What I do? There is opportunity for everyone to share not everyone. There's only 16 weeks in the summer. So 15 people to share a story of someone whose faith and story has been important in their lives. You've already heard one of mine. And so there is a sign up. It will be out there when we're done. But I did on this, as we prepare for our time of prayer this morning, as we begin and enter into for communion, I wanted to share one more person and an opportunity to hold a community in prayer. And so this morning, a face of our faith is Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson was born in 1945 in New Jersey. She was assigned male at birth, but found her true self when she started wearing women's clothes. It reflected her sense of self. She was bullied and assaulted, and as soon as she graduated high school, she went to New York City, where she took on the name Marsha P. for Pay It No Mind Johnson. She built a community around her. She became mother to many, even though she was just 17 herself. It was not easy to live on the margins. She had a difficult time finding employment, turned to sex work, was often arrested by the police. She often didn't have a permanent home. In June 28, 1969, in the early morning hours, the police had raided the bar, the Stonewall Inn, and began arresting its patrons, most of whom were gay men. And Marsha P. Johnson and some of her friends arrived at Stonewall about 2 a.m., where Johnson said in a later interview, the place was already on fire and it was already raided. The riots had already started. And there are many competing stories of what Marsha P. Johnson did during the raid, but she became on the front lines because she, like many other transgender women at the time, felt they had nothing to lose. They were angered by the oppression, by the police, and by the fear. Stonewall, of course, was the beginning that galvanized the first gay rights parades that took place in 1970. Marsha P. Johnson went on to be to form organizations to be a support for trans communities in the city, to set up space and homes for youth that were running away to the city. Throughout the 70s, she became a really prominent member of the New York gay rights scene and community. Andy Warhol used her in a series of images titled Ladies and Gentlemen. In her book and in interviews, she said to see gay people liberated and free and to have equal rights that other people have in America. And she wanted to see her gay brothers and sisters come out of jail and on the streets again. She said, as long as gay people don't have their rights across all of America, there is no reason for celebration. In 1980, she was she was in the lead car of the New York City Gay Pride Parade. In the 70s and 80s, she continued to struggle to find work. She was often arrested, and in the 1990s was diagnosed with HIV. But she continued to work and support communities around her. And on July 6th, 1992, her body was found in the Hudson River. She was 46, and it was ruled a suicide, but nobody believed that. Her friends questioned and suspected the worst. At her funeral, hundreds of people showed up at the church. It was so crowded that people had to stand on the streets. And in 2012, the police reopened her case to look into her death. We all stand on the shoulders of Marsha P. Johnson, who demands that we and everyone has a place. But at the end of 2022, there were at least 32 transgender and gender nonconforming people killed in the United States, with 81% of those being trans women of color. And in this last year, just the last 6 months, there have been 556 bills proposed that would affect the trans community in nearly every state, including Wisconsin. And so, this is our first prayer request. Let us be people, a church that stands with the people that Marcia stood with, and stand alongside those who are advocating. Let us be people who advocate always for the whole and abundant living of everyone. And we are a community that holds each other, that holds the church and holds the world in prayer. And we are those who celebrate together and grieve together. And this week, today, is John Lynch's birthday. Happy birthday. I know he's got. For Bob Krantz and Connie Motlett and Jenny Mickle. And then whether anniversaries this week are Jim and Alex Langredder, and Jeannie and Terry were married this week. We celebrate the ministry and membership of those in our community for Wesley Hazelberg and Ben Louie, Ben Oppenheimer, and Emma Phelps. It's a confirmation season, guys. So that is for 32 years for Chris Davidson and Pat Doring, for Adam Langredder, Olivia Obenberger, Michael Phelps, Egan Stackvon, and for Xavier Hazelberg and TJ Louie. Our community prayers are for Kathy Zabrowski and Greg Berenson and Michael Grant. We continue to pray for those who are healing from surgery, for Kelly, for Sandy Jarrett, for healing for Jessica, for my sister Jessica, Lori Bucket's brother Ken, Sue and Tom Stelling's daughter Jenny, for Fran Pike, for Charlotte's brother Fred, for Connie's friend Jimmy, Julia's friend Sandy, for Sandy Horn's sister Gail, for Jeannie's friend Dixie Dixon, and John Patrick, Steve Thompson's nephew Sam, and friend Carl. For our members who can't get here on a Sunday morning, for Bill and Betsy Welch and Vera Ortman, for Arlo with a fractures metatarsals and tibia, and running around in a boot that he can just slide right out of. Prayers for his parents. Are there others we're lifting up in prayer this day? Yeah.
Just continue prayer for my friend Carl. He's currently in a nursing home awaiting finding permanent placement in a community that doesn't have money, so he's very, very concerned. They just went through a lot of stuff. His bookstore, which was permanently closed, it was very sad.
Continued prayers for Carl as they figure out what's next and where he's going next, but also the closing of his store. Carl ran one of the only gay bookstore in the city, I think, and the only
Private bookstore in the United States.
Yeah, so that is a loss that quietly boxed up, and in the last few weeks. Well, carrying all of these with this, will you join me? Okay, I need two things. I need a hand sanitizer off of that table. Perfect. That's really what I need. Maybe it was just one thing. Thank you. Will you join me in our time of prayer together? This is God's table, and all are welcome. And Of course, it is a non-alcoholic Welch's juice. You may need to, that's what I need. I don't have a thing as to when to turn the page. We'll be fine. The Holy One be with you. Also with you. Open your hearts to the one who is love. Let us give thanks to God who took on flesh. For your presence within us, around us, we give you thanks. God, we give you thanks for dwelling not at distance, but intimately in our lives, for intimately as our own flesh. You gifted us with bodies, and through them we came to know you through touch, through taste, through struggle, through rest. Too often, oh God, we treat the needs, longings, and desires of our own bodies as a barrier to our life in you. We dismiss the bodily needs of our neighbors. We condemn people because their bodies or how they use their bodies in ways different than ours. But you, in your love for us and for all creatures and creations, took on flesh like ours, entangling forever the holy with our flesh. You showed us through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ that we love through our bodies. We seek justice for bodies. We live out our faith in these bodies, not despite them. Jesus, who took care and rest of his own body, revealed what God with flesh on looks like. He fed people, he healed people, he ate with people, he met the physical and spiritual needs of bodies. And when his own body was threatened by the political and religious execution, he turned to the table. He sought first, in his hour of need, to share a meal with his friends. On the night of his rest, he gathered around the table with his companions. He took bread, he blessed it, he broke it, and gave it to his disciples and said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And he did the same with the cup after the supper, saying, "This is the cup poured out of the new. This is poured out in new covenant. The body of God was crucified, and the body of God was resurrected, not only in spirit, but also in flesh. God has shown us in these bodies are holy, precious, and full of possibilities. And so we pray to the Holy Spirit, come, bless this bread and this cup, that we might encounter your presence as we touch and taste and feel. Make us one with the sacredness of our own flesh and blood. Make us one with the flesh of all who suffer. Make us one with the flesh of all the earth. At this table, may we become one body. Amen. And as the people of God, let us join together in the prayer Jesus taught us to pray to our God, who is our mother and our Father, who art in heaven. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Amen. Francine, will you help serve? Beloved community, this table is open to all, to those in joy and celebration, those small and large, those grumpy, those happy. And so we invite you to this table. We're going to switch places. Come as you are able. Nobody likes wearing a boot, buddy. Nobody. Will you join me in our prayer? Enfleshed one, we give you thanks for this meal
that nourishes our hunger for justice,
for
for connection,
for a world that is whole. We long
for so much more than a taste. May we be relentless pursuers of your kingdom until every body has its needs met. Every body is recognized as beloved, and every body is treated with dignity and care. Amen.
It is Pride Month, and so in the United Church of Christ, one of the ways in which we honor that is to honor and remember our affirmation, our open and affirming affirmation, and that comes around once a year, but something that we hold on to and carry with us throughout all of the year. Officially, ONA Sunday would be the 25th of the third Sunday. Fourth Sunday, I won't be here. So we're going to do it today as the start of Pride. And so will you join with me? It is 2 slides. It is our affirmation that this community said together 12 years. Oh, is it 12? 12 years ago now. And friends, just for a moment, will you stand with me as we stand with this, our affirmation? At Emmanuel UCC, we welcome into the full membership and participation in the body of Christ, not only persons of every race, language, age, physical and mental ability, economic and marital status, and faith background, but also persons of all gender identities and sexual orientations. We affirm and celebrate all the loving and committed relationships, and we commit ourselves to work diligently to the end of oppression and discrimination wherever it occurs. Amen. You may be seated, of course. Okay, I added a thing. Do we have a couple more minutes? What time do you guys have to be at graduation? We're still fine. Okay. As part of our prayer and hopefully a song we hear from time to time throughout the summer, I'm including this. I think it'll work. This is just
if God has a face, her face must look like yours. A face like a Tina, an Ahmed or Mildred, a Russ and his husband, Gus and their children. Face like a Kim, a Ted or Tyrone, a Lucy born with an extra chromosome, a Pablo with legs he can't move by himself, a girl born a Daniel who now is Danielle, a Bill You have a heartbeat. You are the face of So take a breath, breathe in the mystery that is there. Universe, we don't know, but I think the truth is, if God has a face must look. If God has a face, his face must look. If God has a face, the face it must be yours.
Our offering plates are in the back. Our singing bowl is to supporting the RIP medical debt, who cares for a nation that cares campaign supported by the United Church of Christ. I'll have more on that next week. Would you like to say something about it? We'll say more next week. We'll run through these announcements. There is cake, there's coffee. Join us for cake and coffee to celebrate our graduates. There's lots happening this week. Hold in prayer our drivers who are delivering meals this week, and all of those they deliver meals to. PFLAG is meeting Wednesday evening out at Summit, but conference is also happening this week. But I'll be out of the office all week. I am available. I'm working, but I'll be bouncing around. Our preacher next week is Jeannie. I am so excited. Our face of the faith is going to be Judas. I'm so excited. There's lots of ways to be involved, to sign up. Don't forget to look for the sign up. That's going to be probably with cake, to share a story. It is not just a getting up and talking in front of people. It's a way to celebrate and honor someone who was important in your life. Think about it that way. We are honoring the folks who brought you here. So in all of that, will you join me in our prayer, our grateful prayer to God for all that God has given us that we are able to give back? Gracious God, you give us so many. Sometimes those gifts are material, and sometimes we ask you to bless all that we share so that no one will feel outside of your church or outside of your love. Amen. Amen. Give us just a second. Will you stand as you are able for our closing hymn? It's recorded, so we just have to get through a couple of things. It is a favorite. Oh, come on. Do we want to do 3 verses or 5? 3. All right, we'll shut it off at 3. Yay, beloveds. May you be filled with the love and the peace of God. May you carry your tradition, your history, your ancestors with you. May they give you courage today. May they give you strength and courage to set the future. Go from this place, then, friends, to love and serve God by loving and serving your neighbor. Amen.
That's almost impossible.
I know it's hard.
All right. No, not necessarily.